I did not want to have to wait until November 22nd to explain what some of the rest of my ideas were, so I decided to record them now and send them so I don't have to wait. So people can watch and see what they think if they so feel inclined, and if not, that's okay. You don't have to. But I'm thinking about building on the stuff I said before, what my thoughts that I would share are, and I want to talk right now about creating a sense of self. What is someone's self-narrative? That's bad. That's my message. A self-narrative is bad. So self-narrative, as it implies, is a narrative about oneself, what somebody thinks of themselves, who they believe they are. I have another quote from C.S. Lewis here, from Perelandra. I really like his quotes. But he's describing watching somebody who is very noble. He's watching Eve, basically, a new Eve. And in the story he says, the expression of her face was noble. It was a great deal too noble. Greatness, tragedy, high sentiment, these were obviously what occupied her thoughts. Ransom, the hero, perceived that the affair of the robes in the mirror had been only superficially concerned with what is commonly called female vanity. The image of her beautiful body had been offered to her only as a means to awake the far more perilous image of her great soul. The external and, as it were, dramatic conception of the self was the enemy's true aim. He was making her mind a theater in which that phantom self could hold the stage. So this quote is describing how somebody who has no sense of herself, she's never seen herself in a mirror before, she's never thought of herself as a character in the world, and she's just been made conscious of who she is and what it means to be her, basically. She started thinking of herself as a person with a role in the world. And before, she was just kind of wandering through life, just kind of happily without a sense of self. She just did things and didn't really think about what it meant to do things. There was no sense of self that she could be proud of. But by being awoken to this sense of who she is and how great it is to be herself, then the quote is describing here, the enemy has created a stage in which she can be tempted to sin later on. He's creating a sphere in which she could do something which is wrong, which is what I want to talk about here. Self-narrative, a sense of self, is extremely dangerous and pretty much always unreliable. When you're talking to someone, it is very valuable to learn their sense of self, because then you're learning how they're going to engage within that narrative, or how they're going to interact with you, and how they think of themselves and how they're comparing themselves in that situation. It's important. But I think we should sort of steer away from a sense of self as much as possible, or at least a sense of complete self. Because once we have a sense of who we are, that becomes an image which we can sort of prop up and doesn't necessarily reflect the reality. The reason this is bad is because someone might think of themselves as intelligent or good-natured or whatever else, and kind of prop up these qualities as really essential to understand. But basically every time somebody says that and attributes that to themselves, it's false. The sense of self is incorrect. And the reason is because once you actually become foundationally any kind of person, once you have a quality, it becomes so ingrained in you that you don't really think about it anymore, and you don't really think to mention it. And thus you can't really attribute it to yourself, and it's not something you're proud of. So if you are describing yourself as kind or intelligent or brave or good-natured or anything else, that means that you've sort of picked it out as something to attribute to yourself, which I won't say that that's always false, or that you're necessarily wrong about that, but as long as it's part of your narrative, it's not second nature to you. It's not a fish in water. People who are genuine geniuses or genuinely famous or any other number of things, they don't really feel a need to share this kind of thing. They wouldn't make it a part of their sense of self because they've forgotten to identify it as a quality that they hold. They've forgotten that it distinguishes them from other people because it's just there. In World War I, Alvin York is one of the one of the bravest examples of soldiery. He walked straight into machine gun fire and had faith in God that he would protect him. That's crazy. But he, I assume, wouldn't identify himself as brave. He certainly didn't publicly do that on the record that I know of. He just did it. He lived his life in faith of God, and the concept of him being brave in the course of that wasn't really a factor to him. Similarly, well, things that really distinguish us, things that really set us apart, that are really engraved in our identity, are things that we would probably think are boring and not really worth mentioning. If it's something that you are truly an expert in, you probably don't need to mention it. So for most people, that's something like the ability to drive, or the ability to not be a serial killer, or basic hygiene. These, like, if you really want to say who are you fundamentally, it's going to be these foundational things that are so ingrained in us that we don't even think about them. We take it for granted that they're a part of our natural cultural context, and thus we don't need to characterize ourselves as experts in these things. You wouldn't talk about how good you are at washing your hands, hopefully, because that's not really a thing that you see as even in the realm of consideration anymore. And as a result of that, you truly are good at that. It's become a part of who you are, and by passing out of your conscious sense of self, it has become second nature, and thus actually a reflection of who you are, what you do on a daily basis. So like a fish in the water, when we really become attuned to something, we sort of forget the concept of that thing, at least as an explicit narrative. It becomes something which we do because of habit and muscle memory, or spiritual muscle memory, and kind of passes away from our sense of who we are. For someone like, famous people or kings, I don't think that ever really passes out of their consciousness, but hopefully they feel less need to draw specific attention to it, because it's become so much a part of their life that, they're not really proud of it. I'm sure a lot of people abuse their privilege, but hopefully they're not really thinking of how famous they are compared to everyone else anymore. They're thinking about their life and the demands for their public, and what their next role is, and what they're going to do with their fame, hopefully. But creating a sense of self is incredibly dangerous and very often false, and thus I think it's really important that we get away from that and really pursue genuine goodness and genuine quality and genuine kindness, to the point that it becomes so extreme and so naturally a part of our lives that it becomes second nature and becomes sort of part of the dance we're always performing without really thinking about it. You're in the motion, you are dancing with other people, and in that rhythmic process you kind of forget to think about what that consciously means, or to advocate for how good you are at it toward other people. This quote here, it's talking about how this lady, she was always noble and extraordinary and wonderful, but now she has a consciousness of what that means. She has an image of herself in the story C.S. Lewis is talking about. She sort of built up a character in her mind which she can inhabit, a role, an acting role which she can inhabit. And that role may even be accurate. At this moment it is accurate, but also it is a role. She is now self-consciously noble. And once we are self-consciously noble, we've lost a little bit of the power of that nobility, because we're conscious we're doing something great, and thus the act of doing something great will a little bit involve the feeling of that weight, the feeling of that greatness as applied to other things or other people that aren't great. Once we're conscious of it, and once we're thinking about it, and once it's a part of our narrative, that awareness is itself a comparison to other people and to other things. And a little bit of what we do is going to be a little bit false. That's not because we are bad at it. It's not because we get lost in the narrative. It's because the narrative itself is a performance. You believe this and you're consciously occupying a role, which means not that it's a temptation to be prideful, but that it is inherently performative. That's what it is. Another place C.S. Lewis talks about this, so that in The Great Divorce, he talks about humility. He says that God doesn't want people to think lowly of themselves or be down on themselves or be prideful. What he wants is for people to actually not think of themselves much at all, to actually love what they come across, to love blessings, either that they've created themselves or that other people have created, just purely for the beauty of the thing itself, not even thinking, not with a critical eye if you made it yourself, but just loving it for what it is and appreciating it without you being a part of it at all. You forget yourself. which is what we do anytime something becomes second nature to us. It becomes habit, it becomes routine, it becomes the field in which we operate. And thus, once we're not thinking about it anymore, it really, really, really becomes a part of us. Which is also true for cruelty, by the way. You can also be cruel to the point that you forget about it and it's a natural part of your nature. And then you don't have a sense of yourself as cruel, but you are being cruel to other people, and it's much harder to get rid of because you're not conscious of it anymore. That's how a lot of things happen. Anyway, lost my train of thought there for a bit. But this ties into what I've said before about looking at versus looking along the beam. I said you have to step into and experience something from the inside. And you really, once you experience it intimately as the thing itself, you step into the beam of light, as C.S. Lewis put it. And then you can understand it in a more powerful way and sort of really encounter something outside of yourself. C.S. Lewis says, looking at the beam from the outside, you can see the shape, you can see its external form, or you step into it and look at it from within, and then it illuminates your entire vision. You're within the light, and it illuminates everything within your field of vision. And similarly, when we really step into these qualities of goodness or intelligence or skill or courage or whatever else, it becomes the light which illuminates our lives, and we lose a sense of narrative, we lose a sense of them being a part of our lives because we've truly come to inhabit them, and thus they are illuminating every aspect of it. We operate within them and are fully submerged, and they can actually truly become a part of our psyche once they are no longer part of our conscious evaluation of ourselves. Once we lose them from our image, they can hit that point of muscle memory and become something that our spirit is truly immersed in a really complete or more complete way, I guess. So, creating a sense of self is often false and definitely a problem because it separates what we think we're doing from what we're actually advocating for on a daily basis. Once we truly enmesh ourselves in good qualities or in skill or in something moral or honorable, then it kind of does become ingrained in us, and it becomes something that we are doing as a process, something that we're inhabiting as if dancing with someone else, or when we're recalling a song, or when we're doing something that's just become a habit because of the muscle memory at that point. For that reason, that's better, and that's how God wants us to pursue qualities, I believe. We have to kind of lose ourselves in the process of it. And once something becomes a part of our self-narrative, our sense of who we are, a sense of how we evaluate ourselves, that's dangerous. Having a sense of our role in the world and what part we're going to play in the world, it's necessary to some extent. We're not going to avoid being conscious of that. But at the same time, it becomes an act which by definition is kind of a facade a little bit. That's dangerous, and that's not something we can do. It probably will not lead to us upholding those qualities properly, and it really pulls us away from a true understanding of whatever it is we're trying to talk about, or from actually practicing these things fully.